Every morning before the city fully woke up, the large music building was already alive in a quiet way. The lights in the long hallways flickered on one by one, and the smell of cleaning soap mixed with the faint scent of polished wood. This place was known for its beauty and talent. Famous musicians practiced here. Big concerts were prepared here. People dressed well when they entered, holding instruments that cost more than some homes. But before all of that, before the applause and the crowds, there was a woman pushing a small cleaning cart across the floor. She had worked in this building for years. Her job was simple and tiring. She cleaned practice rooms, wiped fingerprints from doors, and made sure the floors shined before anyone important arrived. Most people walked past her without looking. Some nodded quickly. Others acted like she was part of the wall. She did not complain. Work was work, and she was thankful to have it. Often, a young girl walked quietly beside her. The girl carried a small school bag and stayed close, careful not to get in the way. After school, there was nowhere else for her to go. Her mother could not afford a babysitter, and the building was safer than the streets outside. So the girl learned to be invisible. She sat on benches, did homework, and watched the world around her without being noticed. The girl noticed everything. She noticed how the sound changed from room to room. In one hallway, soft notes floated like whispers. In another, sharp sounds bounced off the walls. Sometimes a violin cried. Sometimes a piano laughed. The music filled the air, even when doors were closed. To her, the building did not feel cold. It felt alive. She did not speak much. People often thought she was shy, but that was not the whole truth. She simply learned early that silence kept her safe. When you are poor, drawing attention can bring trouble. So she listened more than she spoke. She listened to music. She listened to footsteps. She listened to the way her mother sighed when her back hurt but kept working anyway. Her mother worked hard, but her eyes always softened when she looked at her daughter. She wanted a better life for the girl, one without long hours and aching hands. But dreams cost money, and money was something they never had enough of. Still, she believed in small hopes. She believed that if her daughter studied well and stayed out of trouble, maybe life would be kinder to her. The girl, however, carried a different kind of dream. She did not know when it began. Maybe it started the first time she heard a piano echo through an empty hall. Maybe it started when she felt something move inside her chest, something warm and strong, even though she could not explain it. All she knew was that music made her feel less small. She was not allowed to touch the instruments. Everyone knew that rule. The instruments were expensive, fragile, and not meant for children, especially not children who did not belong there. The girl understood this. She never asked. She never reached out her hand. She only watched from a distance, her fingers sometimes moving slightly, as if pressing invisible keys in the air. At home, their apartment was tiny. The walls were thin, and the noise from neighbors never stopped. There was no space for dreams, no quiet corner for imagination. But sometimes, late at night, the girl tapped softly on the table, creating patterns only she could hear. Her mother thought she was just playing. She did not know that her daughter was remembering melodies. Back at the music building, the girl waited each day for the moments when the halls were empty. Those were her favorite times. When everyone left for lunch or meetings, the building breathed differently. The silence felt deep, like a held breath. In those moments, she felt like the place belonged to her, even if only for a little while. She walked slowly through the corridors, reading the signs on the doors. Each room had a number and sometimes a name. Those names meant nothing to her, but the sounds that came from behind those doors meant everything. She could tell when someone was nervous by the way they played. She could tell when someone was confident, or angry, or sad. Music spoke clearly to her, even without words. Her mother worried when she saw the girl wandering alone, but she also knew there was no other choice. She reminded her daughter to stay out of trouble, to not touch anything, to stay where she could be seen. The girl always nodded. She always promised, and she always kept her promise. Still, something inside her was growing. A quiet pull, like a voice calling her name. She did not know what to do with that feeling. She only knew that it grew stronger every day. The music was not just sound anymore. It felt like a language she already understood. Sometimes, she stood near a closed door and leaned her ear against it. The cool wood pressed against her skin as notes spilled out from the other side. She imagined herself inside, sitting where the musician sat. She imagined her hands moving with purpose, not fear. But those thoughts stayed in her head. Reality was different. People often talked about talent in that building. They used big words and serious faces. They spoke about training, discipline, and years of study. The girl heard those words and wondered where she fit in. She had none of those things. She had no lessons, no teacher, no instrument of her own. She only had listening. One afternoon, as the sun poured through tall windows, the girl noticed a grand piano being moved into the main hall. Several workers struggled with it, guiding it carefully across the floor. She watched from a corner, her heart beating faster. The piano looked different from the others. Bigger, brighter, almost alive. When the workers left, the piano remained there, covered with a thick cloth. Stood quietly, waiting. The girl could not stop looking at it. She felt nervous, excited, and afraid all at once. She did not go near it. She just sat on a bench, pretending to read, while her eyes returned to it again and again. Her mother called her name softly and told her it was almost time to go. The girl stood up, shouldering her bag, and followed without complaint. As they walked away, she looked back one last time. The covered piano stayed still, silent, like it was keeping a secret. That night, she could not sleep. The image of the piano stayed in her mind. She wondered what it would sound like. She wondered if it felt different from the ones she had seen before. She wondered if music would feel different coming from her own hands. She did not know it yet, but her life was already standing at the edge of change. For now, she was still just the cleaner's daughter, walking quietly through halls that were not meant for her. But something had begun, something small and unseen, waiting for the right moment to rise. Days passed, and the girl returned to the music building with her usual quiet steps, carrying her school bag and following her mother down the long hallways. But inside her, a new feeling had begun to grow. It was not fear or sadness or boredom. It was curiosity mixed with longing, a quiet pull toward something she could not explain. She kept thinking about the grand piano in the main hall, the way it had waited, silent and shining under the afternoon sun. After school, she found herself lingering near the practice rooms. The musicians came and went, carrying their instruments with careful hands, whispering to each other, speaking in the language of people who knew music well. She listened, sitting in corners where no one could see her. Sometimes the sounds were fast and energetic, like a conversation. Sometimes they were soft and slow, like a secret being shared. She did not play. She did not touch anything. But she imagined herself inside the music, feeling it move through her fingers, through her chest, through her mind. At home, her small apartment was quiet in the evenings. Her mother prepared simple meals and tidied up the few belongings they owned. The girl sat at the small kitchen table, pencils in hand, drawing lines on paper and tapping imaginary keys. She made small patterns of sound with her fingers, quietly, so no one could hear. It was her way of practicing without a piano. She imagined the grand piano from the building and played songs she had never heard in full, only bits and pieces remembered from practice rooms she had passed. Her fingers were nimble and careful, moving over nothing, but in her mind, the music was real and powerful. Her mother noticed sometimes. She would glance at her daughter, seeing the way her eyes sparkled, the way her lips moved slightly as if following a tune in her head. She did not understand what her daughter was doing, but she smiled quietly, happy to see that she had something that brought joy. It was not schoolwork and it was not chores, but it was a light she could not take away. She knew the world outside was harsh, and this small happiness was precious. Back at the music building, the girl began noticing more details she had missed before. She noticed the way the musicians' fingers curved when they played, the way their shoulders moved with each note, the way their feet tapped gently against the floor. She began to understand that music was not just sound. It was movement, emotion, and attention to every small detail. Each room had a different energy. A violin in one room could sound sweet, or sad, or nervous. A piano in another room could sound proud, or angry, or shy. She listened to everything, absorbing it like a sponge, storing each small moment in her mind. Sometimes the building was empty except for her. The janitors had finished cleaning, the staff were gone for lunch, and the musicians were rehearsing in distant rooms. She walked slowly through the corridors, running her fingers along the polished wood of the railings, feeling the vibrations in the floor. She imagined herself playing in a hall full of people, imagining the applause, imagining the excitement. It was a dream she had to keep inside, because it belonged to her alone. One afternoon, a small group of musicians left a door slightly open as they moved quickly to another room. The girl stopped. She leaned closer and listened. The piano inside was being practiced by a young man, a student who clearly knew every note. His hands moved with speed and grace, and the sound was clean and bright. She closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. For a moment, she felt as though she were inside the instrument itself, every vibration reaching into her bones. She imagined placing her hands on the keys, just for a second, and the thought made her heart race. She returned home that evening and could not stop thinking about it. She sat on the floor, tapping lightly with her fingers, trying to remember the patterns she had just heard. She did not have the piano, but she had her memory, her fingers, and her imagination. And each day it became a little clearer, a little stronger. The girl's talent, though hidden, was beginning to take shape. It was not perfect and it did not follow rules. But it was hers, unique and alive. The next week, something changed. One of the janitors left a small keyboard in a storage room temporarily. The girl's eyes lit up when she found it. It was old, dusty, and many keys were sticky, but it made sound. She pressed a few keys carefully. The sound was crude, but it was a beginning. For hours, she sat there, tapping and trying to recreate the music she had heard. Sometimes it sounded awful, sometimes it surprised her. She smiled quietly to herself. This small keyboard, broken and forgotten, became her teacher. She kept her sessions secret. If anyone saw her, they might take it away. So she practiced in hidden corners, in quiet moments between cleaning and rehearsals. She experimented with rhythms, with melodies she had imagined, with pieces of songs she had remembered. Slowly, she began to understand how her fingers should move, how her hands should curve, how timing could make a note sound happy or sad. The keyboard became a friend, a partner, a safe place for her growing talent. Her mother noticed changes too. The girl's back straightened, her eyes brightened, and she walked with a confidence that had not been there before. She still did her homework, still obeyed instructions, but there was a new spark. Sometimes, her mother would catch her humming quietly. Sometimes, she would see the girl's fingers twitching in rhythm while sitting on a chair. She did not know where it came from, but she did not stop it. She understood that this joy was important, and important things needed space to grow. One day, a well-known musician walked past her while she was practicing on the small keyboard in a nearly empty hallway. He paused, confused at first, then watched quietly as she played a simple melody. Her hands were small, her technique untrained, but the music had emotion. He shook his head slightly, smiling, and continued on his way, leaving the girl unaware. The memory of that moment stayed with her, even though she did not know it. She felt that somehow, the building itself was beginning to notice her presence. As weeks passed, her confidence grew. She started to imagine bigger pieces, combining rhythms she had learned from listening with melodies she had created herself. She wrote little notes on paper, trying to remember patterns. She created her own small compositions, though she had no one to show them to. She did not care. The music belonged to her, and that was enough. One evening, while her mother rested after a long day, the girl whispered to herself, "Maybe one day, they will hear me." She was not sure who she meant by they. Perhaps the famous musicians, perhaps the world, perhaps herself. But the words made her smile. Hope was growing quietly inside her, like a tiny flame in a dark room. It was fragile but alive. Back at the music building, she began noticing even the smallest details. The way the sunlight fell on the polished wood, the way the air smelled when a new instrument arrived, the way echoes bounced differently depending on the time of day. She realized that music was not just sound. It was everything. It was space, movement, air, and silence. It was patience, observation, and feeling. She learned to listen not only with her ears but with her whole body. Her life remained simple and difficult. Money was tight. She helped at home. She kept quiet in public. But the music gave her strength. It reminded her that even if the world did not see her, something inside her mattered. Her talent was growing, quietly and invisibly, shaped by listening, imagination, and endless small practice sessions. By the time she returned to the building the following week, something had changed. She no longer felt like a shadow moving through empty halls. She felt part of the building in a way she had never felt before. The grand piano in the main hall, the same one she had stared at for weeks, called to her. She did not know when or how it would happen, but she knew that one day she would sit there, and her hands would move across the keys. And when that moment came, everything would change. For now, she waited, patient and quiet, letting her talent grow in secret, ready for the moment the world might finally notice. One quiet afternoon, the building felt different. The usual hum of conversations and footsteps was softer, almost absent. The girl walked slowly, her backpack feeling heavier than usual. She paused near the main hall, her heart beating faster than she could explain. The grand piano, covered and untouched for weeks, seemed to call to her more strongly than ever. She had spent so much time imagining it, practicing on her small keyboard, feeling the music in her fingers, that now the thought of touching it seemed both terrifying and inevitable. She stayed hidden behind a pillar, watching as a few staff members finished their work in the hall. Their voices were low, and their movements were distracted. The girl knew she had only a few minutes before someone would notice her. Her mind raced. Should she step closer? What if she was caught? What if she failed? But another thought was stronger. She had to try. Years of listening, imagining, and practicing on a tiny keyboard had prepared her for this moment. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. Her feet made almost no sound on the polished floor. She reached the piano, and for the first time, she touched the smooth, cold wood. Her hands trembled. The keys were shiny and perfect, unlike her small keyboard at home. She hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the notes. Then slowly, she pressed a key. A rich, resonant sound filled the hall. It was deeper, fuller, and warmer than anything she had ever played. Her eyes widened. The sound was alive. It was her sound. She pressed another key, then another. Slowly, she began to play a simple melody she had memorized from the music she had heard. At first, it was careful and quiet, almost like a whisper, but the piano seemed to respond to her, giving her confidence. Her fingers moved more freely, following the patterns she had imagined and practiced. She did not notice how the minutes passed. She was lost in the music, every note filling the space around her. From a distance, a few musicians who had returned from rehearsal paused. They did not expect anyone to be in the hall. They heard the sound at first faint, then stronger. The notes were not perfect, not polished, but they carried emotion, skill, and raw talent. One by one, they approached, curious and silent. They saw a young girl, small and shy, sitting at the grand piano, her fingers moving with care and feeling. The girl did not notice them at first. She was absorbed in the music. Each chord she struck brought memories from the practice rooms, from her small keyboard at home, from the melodies she had imagined alone at night. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was simply playing because it was part of her, part of who she had become without realizing it. The hall, usually empty and echoing with silence, now vibrated with her music. One of the musicians, a young man known for his sharp skills, whispered to the others, "Is she trained?" The others shook their heads, equally surprised. They watched quietly, not wanting to interrupt. Her technique was unpolished, but her timing, her understanding of the keys, and the emotion she put into each note was undeniable. It was rare, almost impossible, to see talent so raw and honest without formal lessons. Meanwhile, the girl felt a strange energy. It was as if the piano recognized her, as if it had waited for her touch all this time. She played faster, more confidently, moving from simple melodies to more complex sequences she had only imagined. The notes filled the hall, spilling into the corridors. Even the staff who were finishing cleaning paused, listening, amazed by the music coming from a child who had never been trained. Suddenly, a soft laugh came from behind her. It was her mother, standing in the doorway, watching with tears in her eyes. She had followed her daughter quietly, worried and curious. Seeing the girl at the piano, lost in her music, she felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. All the hours of practice, all the quiet listening had led to this moment. Her daughter was not just playing. She was alive in the music, commanding the piano with an instinct that could not be taught. The musicians had now gathered around the edges of the hall. They whispered among themselves, pointing at her hands, nodding in approval. One of them slowly approached and asked if she had been formally trained. The girl shook her head, her eyes wide. "No," she whispered. "I just listened and practiced." The musicians exchanged looks of shock. One of them, older and more experienced, knelt slightly to see her fingers on the keys. "You have a gift," he said softly. "This is not something you learn from books or lessons. This comes from inside you." The girl paused for a moment, unsure what to say. She had never thought of her playing as a gift. To her, it was survival, imagination, and longing. She did not play to impress anyone. She played because it was who she was. But hearing the words, seeing the respect in their eyes, a small warmth spread through her chest. She nodded, quietly, and began to play again. The music grew stronger, more confident. She moved through melodies she had only dreamed of, adding small flourishes she had invented herself. The hall seemed to respond, resonating with every note. For the first time, she felt not invisible. She felt seen. She felt alive in a way that no one had ever allowed her to feel before. The music was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who heard it, yet it remained uniquely her own. Her mother stepped closer, unable to resist. She put a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. The girl looked up, eyes shining. "I had to," she whispered. "I had to play." Her mother nodded, tears spilling quietly. She had known her daughter had something special, but seeing it, hearing it, was beyond anything she had imagined. The musicians began to speak quietly among themselves. They offered small encouragements, telling her how her timing, her touch, and her emotion were remarkable. They asked her questions about how she learned. The girl answered shyly, explaining that she had listened, imagined, and practiced whenever she could. She spoke about the small keyboard, about the melodies she remembered from practice rooms, about the nights when she played quietly at home. The musicians listened with awe, realizing that talent could bloom even without formal instruction, and that dedication could create something extraordinary. Minutes felt like hours, but no one interrupted. The girl was in a world of her own creation, yet surrounded by people who understood and appreciated her skill. The piano, once a silent and distant object, had become her partner, responding to her imagination and heart. The music was not perfect by formal standards, but it was perfect in its honesty, in its soul. When she finally paused, the hall was silent for a moment, as if it too was listening. Then soft applause began, starting from the staff, then the musicians, slowly growing into a genuine, heartfelt acknowledgement of what had just occurred. The girl's face turned red. She had never been praised for her playing before. She had never experienced this recognition. The warmth of the applause, combined with the understanding looks of the musicians, made her realize that she had crossed an invisible line. She had stepped from the shadows into the light, not for fame or reward, but because she could not help herself. Her mother embraced her quietly, whispering words of pride and love. The girl felt a wave of emotion she had never experienced. She had been invisible for so long, and now, for the first time, she was noticed. She did not understand what would happen next. Would the musicians teach her? Would they help her? Would she even be allowed to play again? But for that moment, none of that mattered. She had touched the piano. She had made it sing. And in doing so, she had found a part of herself that could never be taken away. The older musician who had first spoken to her knelt beside the piano. "This is just the beginning," he said. "What you have is rare. Talent like this, combined with dedication, can take you far. But you must continue. You must keep listening, imagining, and playing. Never stop." The girl nodded. She did not fully understand what he meant, but she felt it. She felt that the piano, the music, and her own determination were connected in a way that could not be broken. The building, which had once seemed intimidating and unreachable, now felt like a place she belonged. The halls, the echoes, the instruments, they were no longer symbols of separation, but of opportunity. That evening, as the girl walked home with her mother, she held her small keyboard close. She felt different. She felt stronger. She felt alive. She had crossed a threshold, touched something extraordinary, and discovered that her dreams, once hidden and fragile, could become real. And though she did not know what tomorrow would bring, she knew that this moment, this music, and this courage would stay with her forever. The next morning, the girl woke up with a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. The previous day's events replayed in her mind over and over, like a melody she could not forget. She had touched the grand piano and played, and for the first time, someone had truly seen her talent. The applause, the whispered words, the way the musicians had listened, it all felt like a dream. She could hardly believe it had really happened. At school, her thoughts wandered. She found it hard to concentrate on lessons or homework. Every sound reminded her of the piano. The tapping of pencils, the squeak of chairs, even the footsteps in the hall. Music was no longer just a quiet secret. It had become alive, urgent, and important. She wanted to return to the building, to play again, to see if what had happened yesterday could happen once more. Her mother noticed the change immediately. She saw her daughter walking a little taller, holding her head high, eyes brighter than usual. When she asked how she was feeling, the girl smiled quietly and said she was fine. But inside, she was both excited and scared. Excited because her talent was finally seen. Scared because she did not know what would come next. The world outside her apartment felt enormous and uncertain, and she was still just a young girl from a simple life. Later that afternoon, they returned to the music building. The halls looked different now, not because anything had changed, but because she had changed. The same polished floors, the same tall windows, the same practice rooms now seemed to welcome her presence. She walked with a careful confidence, her fingers lightly brushing the railings, feeling a connection to the building she had never noticed before. When they reached the main hall, the grand piano stood in the same spot, gleaming under the sunlight. A small group of musicians were already there, quietly watching. They recognized her immediately. One of the older musicians stepped forward with a smile. "Would you like to play again?" he asked gently. The girl nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never imagined that anyone would offer her a chance like this so soon. She sat at the piano, taking a moment to breathe and touch the keys lightly. They felt familiar now, almost like an old friend. She began to play slowly, letting the music guide her. Her fingers moved with more confidence than the day before. Each note carried emotion. Each chord told a story. The musicians watched silently, nodding, their expressions filled with admiration. They could see the raw talent, the instinctive understanding of the instrument, and the deep emotion that came naturally to her. One of the musicians, a young violinist, whispered to the others, "She has no lessons, no formal training, and yet she understands the music more than most professionals I know." The others agreed quietly. They were amazed at how someone so young, with no guidance, could play with such feeling and depth. It was not just skill, it was understanding, imagination, and a natural connection to music that could not be taught. Her mother stood nearby, holding her hands tightly together. She felt a swell of pride and disbelief. She had always known her daughter was special, but seeing the recognition from professional musicians was beyond her dreams. Her eyes followed every movement, every note, as if trying to memorize this moment forever. She wanted to capture it, to hold it in her heart. The girl continued to play, slowly increasing the complexity of the music. She experimented with patterns she had only imagined, added flourishes she had invented herself, and explored dynamics she had never dared to try before. The hall seemed to respond to her, amplifying the beauty and emotion of the music. For the first time, she realized that her imagination and listening skills could be transformed into something tangible and powerful. Music was no longer just a dream, it was a reality she could shape. After she finished, the hall was silent for a moment. Then, softly, one of the musicians began clapping. Another joined in, then another, until the quiet applause grew into genuine, heartfelt recognition. The girl's face turned red. She had never been celebrated for her playing. She had never received this kind of acknowledgement. The warmth of the applause, combined with the genuine admiration in their eyes, made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. One of the older musicians approached her with a notebook in hand. He wrote down a few notes and sketches, showing her small exercises to help her develop technique. He spoke gently, explaining that her talent was extraordinary, but that with practice and guidance, it could grow even further. The girl listened intently, absorbing every word. She felt both nervous and excited. She was stepping into a world she had only imagined, and for the first time, she had someone guiding her through it. Over the next few weeks, her days became a mixture of school, practice, and visits to the music building. The musicians took turns showing her small lessons, teaching her how to refine her movements, how to improve her timing, and how to express emotions more clearly through her playing. They encouraged her to keep imagining, to keep experimenting, and to trust her instincts. The girl soaked up every lesson, every suggestion, eager to learn and improve. Her mother watched from the sidelines, always close but never interfering. She knew the importance of letting her daughter find her own path. She offered quiet encouragement, a smile, or a gentle word when needed. The girl felt supported but also free. She knew that this opportunity was rare, and that her own effort, patience, and imagination would determine how far she could go. Word began to spread quietly through the building about the cleaner's daughter, who played the piano with extraordinary skill. Musicians, staff, and even visiting artists began to stop by, curious to see her perform. Some offered advice, others simply listened, amazed by the raw talent before them. The girl remained humble. She did not seek attention. She simply played, letting the music speak for her. Her heart and hands worked together, and the world began to notice. One afternoon, a famous artist who had been visiting for a performance asked to hear her play. The girl hesitated at first, but her mother encouraged her with a gentle nod. She approached the piano and began to play, her fingers moving smoothly across the keys. The artist listened, eyes wide with surprise. The music was not just technically impressive. It was full of feeling, of life, of understanding. He could see that her gift was rare and genuine. He approached her after she finished, kneeling slightly to speak at her level. "You have something extraordinary," he said softly. "You must never stop playing. Keep learning, keep imagining, and keep listening. The world needs to hear your music." The girl nodded, speechless. She had never dreamed of someone like this acknowledging her in this way. The words felt like sunlight, warm and bright, filling a part of her she had kept hidden for years. From that day forward, opportunities began to open. She was invited to small performances, given chances to practice on better instruments, and slowly introduced to a community of musicians who respected and admired her talent. Each experience taught her something new, helping her grow not only as a musician but as a person. She learned discipline, patience, and the joy of sharing her music with others. Her mother continued to stand by her side, proud and protective, but she allowed her daughter the space to explore and grow. The girl remained humble, always remembering where she had come from and the small, quiet hours she had spent listening, imagining, and practicing alone. She never forgot the long days when she had been invisible, and she never lost the wonder and excitement that had brought her to the piano in the first place. As the weeks and months passed, the girl's confidence grew. She no longer felt like the cleaner's daughter who only watched from the shadows. She had stepped into the light, and her music was being recognized by those who understood it best. She knew that this was only the beginning, that the path ahead would require hard work, patience, and dedication. But for the first time, she believed in herself fully, and she felt the thrill of a future filled with possibility. The story of the girl who had touched the piano and captured the hearts of musicians spread quietly, inspiring those around her. She became a symbol of what talent, perseverance, and imagination could achieve, even when hidden in the most unlikely places. And as she continued to play, to learn, and to grow, she knew that her journey had only just begun, with countless melodies waiting to be discovered, created, and shared with the world. The girl's life had begun to change in ways she could not have imagined. After weeks of playing at the grand piano under the watchful eyes of musicians, she felt more confident than ever. She arrived at the music building each day with a mixture of excitement and determination. No longer the quiet shadow who followed her mother through empty halls, she now had a place in the world she had always observed from a distance. Her days became busy. Between school and lessons with the musicians, she spent hours practicing. Each day, she pushed herself further, exploring new melodies, experimenting with rhythm, and learning to express emotion more clearly. She discovered that playing the piano was not just about hitting the right notes. It was about telling a story with her hands, allowing the music to speak when words could not. And with each passing day, her story became stronger, clearer, and more beautiful. Her mother continued to support her quietly, proud of her daughter's growing talent. She watched her practice, sometimes lingering in the hallway just to hear the music. She saw the joy in her daughter's eyes, the determination in her hands, and the confidence in her posture. She had worked hard for her family, cleaning rooms and floors, dreaming of a better life for her child. And now, she could see that dream beginning to take shape, not through money or luck, but through the girl's own dedication and love for music. One afternoon, a famous artist who had been in the building for a rehearsal invited her to play in a small concert for a private audience. The girl felt nervous, but her mother reassured her with a gentle smile. She knew this was an important opportunity. The girl practiced even more diligently, repeating pieces over and over, imagining the audience, feeling the music fill the hall. For the first time, she considered that she might not just play in empty halls or for small groups of musicians. She might play for people who had never heard her before, who had no reason to notice her, and yet might be moved by her music. The day of the private concert arrived. She walked onto the stage, hands trembling slightly as she approached the grand piano. She took a deep breath and sat down. The room was filled with people she did not know, all waiting to hear her play. She felt a small wave of fear, but then she remembered all the times she had imagined this moment. She remembered the quiet hours alone, the small keyboard at home, the music she had created from nothing. Slowly, her fingers touched the keys, and the first notes filled the room. The music was gentle at first, soft and quiet, as if testing the waters. Then it grew stronger, more confident, carrying emotion and depth that took the audience by surprise. She moved through the melodies she had practiced, adding small touches she had invented herself. The musicians in the room, some famous and experienced, watched in awe. They whispered among themselves, clearly impressed. The audience felt the story in her music, the emotions that poured from her fingers, and the honesty in every note. When she finished, there was a brief silence, and then the room erupted in applause. The girl's cheeks turned red, and tears filled her eyes. She had never been applauded like this before. She had never imagined that people outside her secret world of practice would notice her, would be moved by her playing. Her mother stood nearby, smiling and wiping her own tears. She knew her daughter had worked hard, had waited patiently, and now she was being rewarded with recognition. After the concert, the musicians and artists approached her. They offered guidance, encouragement, and advice. They spoke about opportunities to perform in larger venues, to learn from professional instructors, and to continue growing her talent. They recognized that she had something rare, a combination of raw skill, emotion, and dedication that could not be taught. The girl listened carefully, feeling both nervous and excited. She realized that her journey was only beginning, that the world of music was vast and full of possibilities. Over the next few months, her life changed in small but meaningful ways. She received lessons from trained musicians, practiced on better instruments, and performed in small local events. Each performance gave her more confidence, more experience, and a deeper understanding of music. She learned that talent alone was not enough. Discipline, perseverance, and passion were equally important, and she embraced each lesson, each challenge, with the quiet determination that had always been a part of her. Her mother remained her anchor. She reminded her daughter to stay humble, to continue working hard, and to remember where she had come from. She celebrated each success, big or small, and offered comfort whenever the girl felt doubt or fear. The bond between them grew stronger, built on love, support, and shared dreams. The girl knew that no matter how far her talent took her, her mother would always be by her side, a constant presence in her life. Word of the cleaner's daughter who played the piano with extraordinary skill spread beyond the building. Musicians and instructors shared her story quietly, and soon, she was invited to larger events, competitions, and workshops. Each opportunity taught her something new, introduced her to new people, and challenged her in ways she had never imagined. She met other talented young musicians, some trained from childhood, some self-taught like her. She learned to collaborate, to listen, and to grow alongside others who shared her passion. Through it all, she remained humble. She never forgot the empty halls where she had first imagined music, the small keyboard at home, or the quiet afternoons spent listening and dreaming. Those moments had shaped her, given her the foundation to grow, and reminded her that every small step mattered. She understood that talent alone was not enough to achieve greatness. Dedication, patience, and love for what she did were equally important. One day, after a long practice session, she sat at the grand piano alone, letting her fingers move freely across the keys. She played a melody she had created herself, one that carried all her experiences, emotions, and dreams. The sound filled the hall, echoing through the empty corridors. She smiled quietly to herself. This music was hers. It had grown from listening, imagining, and quiet practice. It was a reflection of her journey, her patience, and her heart. Her mother entered the hall quietly, watching her daughter play. She did not interrupt. She simply stood there, observing the young girl who had once been invisible, who had quietly learned and dreamed, and who was now creating something extraordinary. The mother felt a deep sense of pride and love. She had always known her daughter was special, but seeing her live her dream, hearing her music, and feeling the emotion she poured into it was beyond words. The girl finished the piece, her hands resting on the keys. She looked at her mother and smiled. In that smile was gratitude, joy, and a quiet determination. She knew that her journey was far from over, that there were still challenges, opportunities, and lessons ahead. But she also knew that she had already come a long way, that her music had found its voice, and that the world was beginning to listen. The story of the cleaner's daughter who touched the piano and captivated musicians with her talent became a symbol of hope and perseverance. It reminded everyone who heard it that talent can be found in the most unexpected places, that dedication and imagination can overcome obstacles, and that dreams, no matter how small or hidden, can grow into reality. She had stepped from the shadows into the light, and in doing so, she inspired others to believe in the power of patience, hard work, and heart. As she continued to play, learn, and grow, she carried the memory of every quiet hour spent listening, every imaginary melody, and every small step of practice. Each note she played was a tribute to her journey, to her mother's support, and to the invisible moments that had shaped her talent. She knew that the future held endless possibilities, and she was ready to meet them, one melody at a time. Her story was far from finished, but she had already proven that passion, dedication, and heart could transform a life in ways no one could have predicted.